Thank you, Karen, and thanks to all of you. See, we have folks from all over. I'm Jonathan Fribley in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and delighted to be facilitating this discussion with you today. Our focus is going to be thinking about how children use their prior experiences, all 3 years of, or 4 years, or 5 years of those prior experiences, to make sense of new learning. And the premise that I want to start with, of course, is that that is a powerful tool for all of us in our learning. And when we support children in connecting to what they already know in new situations, then two things happen. One is they learn more, and the other is they see that as a strategy in other challenging situations that I can go, oh, pause, and oh, what do I know about this? Where might I have experienced something similar, which they won't do consciously, deliberately when they're five, but they can when they're 10 or 12 or whatever that might be, and we can give them the thinking structures for that. Um, we'll need to attend to a few things along the way. One will be that children's children's background knowledge, their prior experiences, of course, are dramatically different, and we'll have to think about how we navigate that. And something else we'll need to think about is what we do to assist children, support children in actually connecting to what they know. Because I think one of the things that is likely to show up, well, I'm sure it'll show up in our discussion because I'm going to raise it if nobody else does, is that sometimes children know more about something than they bring to the conversation. And we can help them connect with, access, pay attention to what they already know. So, in doing that, we're going to use this specific framework of a powerful interaction. I'm seeing some names and faces in here that I recognize from other discussions. And so, for some of you, this will be perhaps as many as the fifth conversation that we've had on this powerful interactions theme, and we will make connections to that. For those of you who haven't been for any other sessions, don't worry. We will access your background knowledge as well, and connect with that. Yeah, I think that's probably enough to get started. And in fact, I think our oh, you know what I should mention? There is actually only one handout for this webinar. I often have a whole number, and I don't really have a bunch of other tools to share with you on this one. So for this one, you've got the PowerPoint, but at the end, there will be information on how to contact me if that's helpful. And I'm always glad to discuss and ask questions with folks. So please feel free to do that. In any case, this is the fifth of 6 webinars around powerful interactions. And for those of you who that context makes sense, we will try to do that. And the basic idea here is that we can be intentional about how we enter interactions with children, that when we notice our own presence and when we do the work to connect with a child before we begin the sort of teaching, learning aspect of the interaction, then we are better situated to make effective decisions, and children are more receptive to the moves we make. Once we've done that, there are some different strategies for supporting their learning, and these are 6 of them here that we've referenced up to this point. Number 5 today. The last one is in 2 weeks, 4 weeks. I'm not sure. I think 4 weeks. Yeah. Okay. So let me give you a moment to just practice that being present. That's always a key to any of our work with children. So let's give ourselves a moment here to just notice what might be showing up in our thoughts, what might be showing up in our feelings or our bodies, and having some space to set that aside. They talk about mindfulness being noticing what's going on in your mind, your thoughts, your body. That's the easy part. The harder part is to do that without judgment, and which is the second part of mindfulness. So let's just settle in and be here. And let me invite us to start making some connections that may assist us with our work. So I'd invite you, if you spent time with young kids today, or if you spent time with young kids in the last week or month, I'd invite you to think about a time, an instance when a child may have somehow made it clear or at least suggested to you that something they were doing was connected to an earlier experience. Sometimes they'll say it very explicitly. They'll say, like, my mom has one of those, or I've got a baby sister too. And sometimes you'll just be able to tell from the way they respond to something that they're getting it. And you will perhaps know some of the background that, oh, their sister takes them to dance lessons. Okay. Tammy referenced one here where a child very directly said, I've read that book with my mom and I know what happens, but I won't tell. All right. So your ally there. Yeah. So a very direct experience in that case where you're reading a book that they're familiar with, already read before. Anyone else want to share any kinds of comments they might have on times they see children do this? And as you're sitting with that, I want to note maybe comments are about to come flying into the chat, but I want to note if it's a little, if you sort of have to pause and think about that and wonder about that. Oh, thanks, Joy. Big pets and little pets. Connie says a parent who found a new job and the household changes and a friend was next to the so they're two friends thinking together there about when parents change jobs. Yes, yesterday night I went to the park. We went on the swings, just like the swings we have at school. Very explicit connection there. Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so we're seeing a number of moments where children are explicitly referencing situations and experiences that they've had before. I want to note that, um, you know, we obviously aren't watching the exact process of the neurons firing in their brains, so we don't know exactly what they're thinking, but we do know from research that they're doing this all the time. And I think if there's sort of one foundational piece to take away from this conversation here, it is that children may be making connections to prior experiences and we may not be aware it's going on. Okay. And some of that, of course, is just because we can't get inside their heads. Some of that also may be because it may not be something that we are deliberately tuning into, is really being listening for those connections or thinking about what we know about a child that may assist us with that. And I know that's certainly been true for me, and that part of my practice in sort of supporting children using their prior experiences has simply to be more consciously aware of paying attention of it. We listen for what numbers a child gets right or wrong, or what colors they get right or wrong, or whatever that might be. Something else we can be listening for is, what do they seem to know about this subject? What are they showing me about experiences they've had at home? A couple more comments here. Shannon says, playing with toys at school, the kiddos say, oh, I have this one at home or something similar at home. Absolutely. Thanks. So a real hands-on experience there. Making a connect what it means to go under and over. Okay, so they're so they're taking what you so Lee, what I think, if I'm hearing right, they're taking what you introduce in the class and then using it later on too, which is also a really powerful way of this happening. And something we want to think about is it's not necessarily just what goes on at home. We can create the background knowledge that children can use later on in our lessons and instruction and just interactions with them. Oh yes, new shoes. Then everybody has had experiences shopping with new. Well, not everybody, but many children have had experiences of going shopping and then thinking about what they bought. And yeah, I guess I'll just leave that there. So we are, oh, Abioyo. Ah, they're remembering it from another time. Feelings, students, oh, that can be a very evocative one, can't it? They're talking about feelings, and then other times they have had that feeling. And then there's all kinds of experiences that go with that. So we're coming up with plenty of connections here. And I think one of the things I want to highlight here is I think, if I'm hearing right, that people are describing a kind of enthusiasm or delight on the parts of children when they make these connections. So Shannon's, oh, I have this or something similar, and she's got an exclamation point there, right? Or the stories about children bringing, having had experiences and going shopping. Children often, I think delight might not be too strong a word for making these connections. It lights them up. It helps them feel that something is familiar, that they sort of have a window into something that they, or maybe, a great big door into something that they might not have otherwise. So the big ideas here are that children do use those prior experiences in new situations. They make things familiar with them. And then what we're going to try to do is think about how can we be intentional about what I've called here bridging the gap, or making connections between what children know and what they're learning in school. And we'll need to think some about sort of how it differs with what children know, but that's where we're going to go. Um, a couple tools that we'll make use of. One is the Powerful Interactions book that we've used before. For those of you who've been in these sessions before, you do not. I should have. Oh well, you can see the cover right there. And this particular there is actually a particular chapter in this book titled "Linking the New to the Familiar," which we're going to reference some. I've had the great fortune to spend a lot of time working with those authors of that book and thinking about how we can share some of these kinds of processes. And there's nothing unique to the Powerful Interactions folks about this. Any of you who are involved in Head Start are familiar with the classroom assessment scoring system. And this is right in the concept development dimension, which of course is one that we're all learning to practice more. So if that rings a bell for you, then, or if that fits with your prior experience, then you just lit up or maybe got a frowny face. I'm not sure, depending on how you feel about the class, but it is a tool for describing what we're going to be thinking about. So, this notion of a powerful interaction. What I want to suggest to you is that we certainly, can be making connections to children's prior experiences at any time. When we do this in the middle of an interaction, the sort of character of that interaction matters as far as children's sort of receptivity and the learning that goes into it. And I'm going to borrow a phrase that has been around in education a long time, the idea of a teachable moment or a teachable interaction. And what I want to suggest here is that there are things that we can do that sort of make an interaction more likely to be a teachable moment with a child. And here's the structure that we offer on that in Powerful Interaction. The idea here is that the first thing that makes a difference in an interaction is what happens before the interaction, and specifically about how we show up. And I want to note something about this photo here. You can see that this educator is watching. Okay, we gain information about what a child's up to. We begin to sort of enter the child's space rather than make it our space by that watching. And the other thing is she's given herself some time. Once again, we don't know exactly what's going on in her brain, but she does have the opportunity there to just slow down and be present and focus in on this child. And We can't do that all the time every day because there's that child over in the corner that needs our attention, and it's almost lunchtime, and somebody's trying to get their boots off, and all the other things that distract us from interactions. But when we can, that we slow down and be as fully present in an interaction with a child as we can be. And then as we enter that interaction, our first move is not an instructional one. It's not how many can we put in or what shape is this, but instead it's a relationship move. Because when we say to a child, can I play? Or when we simply slow down and get down low and smile at them and watch them or describe what they're doing, but somehow give that message that they are seen, that they're valued, then our presence is a welcome one. We're attuned to each other. Those mirror neurons start lighting up, all the rest of that. And the child's in a receptive space for us. And then we can use that state that the child and we are in with them to extend learning using any of a variety of strategies. The one that we're going to focus on today being the connecting to prior learning, prior experiences. Those of you who've been at some of the other sessions, this is actually the sort of fifth tool in the toolbox. And as I say, there's one more yet to play with around curiosity. Let's play a little game. And I should do a little background music, right? This show's been around long enough that I watched it with my grandmother. And I'm plenty old. The Price is Right. And you'll see, it may seem a little silly to be playing The Price is right now, but I'll promise you there is an instructional purpose. And I realized in your PowerPoint, I only had a picture of Bob Barker. I didn't have one of Drew Carey, so I added Drew Carey. That's the new version as of today. All right, so let's play a little Price is Right. I will put up some things for you to consider purchasing, and let you go ahead and put some prices in the chat. We'll see how you do. All right. So let's start out with some toothpaste. Colgate Max Fresh toothpaste, clean mint, 6.3 ounces, tube size, 3 count at Target, $6. Oh no, $7. $6.32. Tammy, is that something 99? $8 from Amanda, 7, 8. 850, 9, 6, 7. You're all kind of around the 899. Okay. So I need to tell you that I actually did this same activity, I think it was last year, and it was $649. It is now $799. So who had $8? $8.50. Yeah, nobody was way off. Although, Lee, you need to get out and shop a little more there. Things have gone up in price since then, I'm afraid, right? So, all right. So, for those of us with young kids, really young kids, Huggies Little Snugglers at Walmart, a 156 count. This is the big container of Huggies Little Snuggies. Let's see what we get for this. What do you think? These have gone up in price too. I'll just let you know. 50, 45, 30, 45, 14, 14.95, 29, 28. Remember, this is the 156 count, folks. $30, 30. Folks, nobody here has a baby right now, do they? Oh, Joanna does. $72.99. They've gone up about $25 in the last 2 years. All right, so let's take a look at something in Chicago. We're going to go to a restaurant in Chicago. Jimmy's Hot Dogs. I don't know if anybody's been there. I'm forgetting where that is. Maybe somebody knows. So, a Jimmy's Red Hot with fresh cut fries. I understand the fries are to die for. $8.99, 15, 15, 7, 12, 10, 10, 7, 12. Okay, everybody, these are a deal. Still $6.49. Edie's got it. Maybe this is in your neighborhood. All right, Shannon and Sheila were close. All right, so now we're gonna Depending on your culinary experience, this one may or may not be familiar for you. I had to do some looking up. Rabo encendito? I think that's how that's pronounced. If one of you has this dish regularly, please help us out. This is a dish at the Versailles restaurant in Miami, which I can tell you is a Cuban restaurant. Um, and It's braised oxtail in red wine. Arroz amarillo is yellow rice, and fufu is the little sort of dough balls on the bottom right there. I think they're made with plantain and cassava, maybe. I'm not sure. Okay. And we've got everything from what do we have here? From $12 up to 75. Okay. This one got the biggest range on so far, right? Okay. 26.40. Now we're going to come back to Chicago. All right. And we've got a steak, a bistecca alla fiorentina, a 60-day dry aged 42-ounce prime porterhouse with sea salt extra virgin olive oil at Tre Dita in Chicago. I understand this is a steakhouse in Chicago, and we are currently at everything from $45 to $100 for a steak. $85, $90, $60. Okay, everybody, you need somebody to take you out to Tradita because, in fact, the price is $290 for a steak. Okay, we're not going there. All right, so now I'm sure that everybody got a Valentine's Day present, right? And maybe somebody got you a pair of shoes. This is from the Valentine's Day collection, the Christian Louboutin. Is that how you pronounce that? Somebody here knows. Ooh, Amanda goes right to 2,000. Okay, Tammy, 225, 1,000, 5,000. Ooh, we have jumped. The same people that are eating that steak are wearing these shoes, right? So, okay, 1,500. Yeah, you folks are like, you've been shoe shopping, but these aren't the ones you're buying, I'm guessing. These are the ones we're watching other people buy. And these shoes go for $29.95 in the Gifts for Her Valentine collection, $2,995. All right, only a couple more. This one got a little harder. We had everything from 150 to 5,000. This painting, Interchange by William de Kooning, sold in 2015. Anybody want to guess the price? $3,000, $25,000, 150,000, 3 million. We have everything from $3,000 to $3 million. Let me just tell you, just because you wear $2,000 shoes doesn't mean you can afford this painting. This painting sold for $300 million. So save your kids' artwork, all right? Yeah, I believe it's the most expensive painting in the world at that time, anyway. So, why are we doing this? Here's my you know what? Let's skip the John Deere. I think we've got this combine sells for a little over $1 million, and you probably wouldn't have known that either because you're probably I don't know. Maybe we got some folks who are farmers here. I shouldn't say that. You're not all up in Chicago, right? There's somebody down the southern part of the state who's on a farm and buying farm machinery. So here's the question: which items were you relatively successful with? Which items were harder for you? And I'm guessing like it's like we did pretty well with the toothpaste, right? We were a little off on those little snugglers, but nobody said they were $5,000, right? We weren't sure on the beef tongue, the steak we were off on. And here's what I would suggest is that items that you are somewhat familiar with, you're more likely to have some kind of a ballpark idea on, right? So if I asked you how much toasted oats were, you wouldn't know exactly whether they're 2.99 or 4.99 or whatever, but you wouldn't say they're $85, right? You'd be somewhere near. Whereas if I asked you how much that oil tanker cost, that'd be tough, right? Because you haven't bought anything resembling an oil tanker. Even if you don't buy toasted oats, you do buy Lucky Charms or you buy, something, right? You buy some other cereal and you have some idea what they cost. And you probably have not bought an ocean going vessel lately, right? And so you don't have background knowledge. You don't have prior experiences to get you there. You haven't been to an art auction lately, right? And so you don't know what modern art's going for. I mean, I didn't either. I had to look it up, right? So the simple idea here is simply this, that when we are able to access information from our prior experiences, we do better in new situations, right? Even if you're not buying Colgate toothpaste, you've bought dental products. And so you've got an idea, right? So this is the same thing that kids are doing, except, of course, they're only 3 years old or 5 years old. And by definition, they don't know as much, right? And also, they don't have the practice in accessing some of that prior knowledge to use it in new situations. So we're going to give them a hand, all right? But in terms of thinking about like what do they know about, an image that gets used sometimes is thinking about children as having a tote bag or a backpack that they come to school with, right? Of their experiences, of their interests, of their knowledge. And of course, that's different. And every child has a rich backpack, but every child's is different, right? And, here's a very simple example. Like, 100 years ago, when I was teaching in the classroom, we would set up dramatic play to be like a restaurant, like a diner, okay? Because kids had experience going to diners. Now, if we set up dramatic play with a restaurant, it may well be it's probably fast food, right? Because that's what kids easily connect with is fast food. Or it may be a drive-in now, right? The drive-through lane, because some kids never go in a restaurant at all anymore, right? So differences in background knowledge. Um, Here in Minnesota, we've been learning a whole lot more than I've been learning a whole lot more than I knew about some families' lives that have had experiences different from mine as we've connected with immigrant communities. And my son and daughter are working with a family right now who, with their fourth grader, they walked from Ecuador, okay, to Minneapolis, to the border, basically, right? So, what are the life experiences that that 4-year-old is coming into, or fourth grader, I'm sorry, is coming into that classroom with, right? Very different from the kids growing up in who spent their whole life in the house 2 houses down from us here, right? So everybody's coming in with something, but they're all different. And what, of course, they do is they use those prior experiences to make sense of new experiences. So if you do set up dramatic play, even if it's not McDonald's, if it's fast food, then they know you order at a counter, although now you probably order at a screen, right? And so they have those kinds of experiences, and they know that if you're inside, you can take it over to a table, and how you get your drinks and what that might be. And then, some of it can be a stretch. So, like if you're studying community medical helpers, and you're talking about an ophthalmologist, okay, first off, kids aren't going to know that word. And many children will never have been to an ophthalmologist because their eyes are fine. They do the screening, their eyes are fine, right? But they have been to some other medical provider where someone checks them out or they sit in a chair or whatever that might be. And so you can ask, has anybody ever been to the doctor? What do they do at the doctor? Right? Oh, when they go to the ophthalmologist, they don't check your knees, they don't check your ears, they check your eyes. And so you can make those kinds of connections by referencing children's background knowledge. Let's see. This is absolutely, I mean, I think this is just a quote that indicates that this is how people read. Okay. Yeah, and Sandra highlights that this is what happens. They do make the connections they can, right? So if somebody comes in with glasses, they talk about somebody else in their family or their knowledge with glasses. Oops, let's see. I just wanted to highlight here that the single greatest predictor of reading comprehension. Now, this is different from decoding. This isn't about whether I can go cat, cat, but if I'm reading about a subject and I can do the decoding, the key to my success in understanding what's going on is going to be what I know about the subject. And for those of you who were in an earlier webinar, we did some reading about a newspaper article on a cricket match. And those of us who knew something about cricket followed along, and the rest of us who didn't were completely lost, even though we could read the words, right? And that's true with all kinds of subjects, that when we know something about it, then we can make sense of it. So, I'd like to just play around with this with you in a format that is common to have happen in an early childhood program. And I'm going to use an example from a particular curriculum, but this applies to anybody who's doing any kinds of studies or themes or focused exploration. I'm simply, this is, to be clear, this is not an ad for the creative curriculum. It is an example of a curriculum that structures things that way, and we can sort of use some things out of there. So in the creative curriculum, or, in your own devised studies, whatever, or explorations, whatever they might be, you might decide that you are going to, with the children, explore around buildings, something that they have some level of familiarity with, and yet there's still plenty to learn. So let's just pause for a moment and think a little bit. If we were going to study buildings with children, what would be some things they might know? What would be some experiences they might have had? What might be some interests or curiosities that they might bring to an exploration about buildings? Let's just take a few comments. Starter is going to be they all live in some kind of a building, right? Where they live. All right. Where they visit. And that is going to differ by child, isn't it? Right? Some children have been to the art museum. Some children have been to Jimmy's hot dog shop, right? Many different buildings, right? New construction. So they might have some idea of how buildings are put together if they've been across the street from a construction site. Maybe your school's across the street from a construction site, right? Rooms that are in a building. So different buildings have different purposes for different rooms, right? So if we go in a restaurant, there's going to be a dining area, there's going to be a kitchen. If we go in a home, there's going to be a bedroom, a bathroom, okay? So on. Let's see. Talking about where they live is absolutely a starting point. And I want to just note that in this illustration here, what I tried to do was indicate some very different types of buildings, that they somebody may be living in a trailer home. Somebody may be living in a triplex. Somebody may be living in a house with a three-car garage, right? So, and everyone's experiences with that are very different, right? I was out at a friend's house a few years ago when we had when a family had some immigrants had just arrived from Somalia. We were hosting them at it's a house out in the woods, and they wanted to know who lived downstairs. And Chris was like, well, that's my basement. That's our space too. And they were like, really? You can have a space downstairs. Okay. And they wanted to know who lived out in that other building. It was his detached garage. Well, that's where we put our cars. And so, that was a new understanding for them, that you could have a separate building to put your cars in. That seemed kind of wild and crazy, right? But then you go around whatever, but then they knew that they actually built some structures on the site that were buildings unlike anything I had ever seen. And so, here we are, right? What does your neighborhood look like? I forget what street that is in Chicago on the left there. And I was going to say everybody, but there's no such thing as a building that everybody knows. But lots of kids know Walmart, right? And kids in Chicago probably don't know that building on the bottom center, but I'll bet there are plenty of people here that do, right? Okay. Oh, the Lincoln Park area. Thanks, Edie. I was thinking, yeah, thank you, right? And as Karen points out, some are in a shelter, right? So lots of different experiences for buildings. For those of you who haven't spent a lot of time in the country, that building in the bottom center, that's a grain elevator. And many children will not know what that is. And one of you, at least one of you, if you're in, central or southern Illinois, has a child who's driven with their parent to that grain elevator to deliver corn or something like that, right? And has been inside that building and seen how, the grain gets carried up and so on. So this huge diversity of experiences that children have with buildings. And a sort of long time way of bringing all that background knowledge to the table is a KWL chart. And I'm not saying everybody has to do a KWL chart, but I do want to use it to illustrate what happens in helping children access their background knowledge. And in case people aren't familiar, the idea with a KWL chart is that when you're engaging in some kind of study, that you start by finding out what children know. That's the K. All right. So, and we spend some time asking children about their experiences with whatever it is that we're studying. Okay. And then after we've sort of gathered that background knowledge, then we can devise some questions, the W. What do we want to know? And then when we complete our study or in the process of our learning, we can fill out the L column. That's what have we learned, right? But let's focus on this K. That's what I want to think with you most about, all right? So let's say, well, in this case, this is a study that was done around trees, and the children started out with some information that the teacher solicited from them, that they have leaves, they're different sizes and shapes, and the leaves are different colors, and trees are different sizes, and animals can live in trees, and we can make things from trees, and trees have fruit. So that's some nice information about trees, all right? And then we can use that information in order to solve problems. So if we make children's background knowledge, we make their prior experiences visible, then we can do something similar to what I saw this teacher do in this next one, right? So they found something green outside, and the teacher described it as, they figured out that it was what was called moss, which was a new idea for kids. And then Jaquan wanted to know if the moss was a tree, because they were studying trees. So they went to their KWL chart and looked at what makes a tree. Okay, well, they have leaves. What about the moss? Okay, oh, moss looks like it has leaves too. Maybe it's a tree, right? Oh, and then Tyrone had talked with us about trees having bark on the outside. Let's look at that moss. And they couldn't find bark on the moss, so they're thinking, maybe it's not a tree, right? But you can see how they're encountering this new situation, and they're able to easily access their background information because it's been made visible. So we can do thinking in a new situation. Now, let's do some thinking about what gets us there. Let's imagine we're in your class. We could have had this conversation about buildings, but let's take it for trees right now since we're there. Let's imagine we're in your classroom and you ask the children, what do you know about trees? Okay. What happens? What might be some of the comments you might get? What might be some of the classroom dynamics? Let's think a little bit about that. If anyone wants to share some comments, let's give you a moment to do that if you'd care to. Otherwise, just take a moment and think about what would happen if you asked that question. Aha. So Connie's recognizing they do have experiences. And in your classroom, they've climbed a tree, they see trees outside. Okay. So they've got at least a couple things. Kids are going to say, I have trees in my yard, and they're going to say they're tall, right? We have trees in our yard. Hey, so children do have firsthand experience with trees, no doubt about it. Okay. Every child has at least seen a tree. There's trees on your school property, even if there aren't any in their apartment building or wherever that might be. Oh, Connie, some children are going a little further, right? Bugs live in trees, and now and Shannon and Connie have both mentioned that children have climbed trees. Some children have climbed trees. I remember getting stuck in a tree when I was like 5. That's one of my more vivid childhood memories, actually, right? Some kids have been up in trees and animals living in them. And I want to actually pick up on something with the animals living in them, because that can come from either of two places, right? They may have actually observed animals in trees, right? Squirrels, maybe a cat, birds, or that may be something they're taking from a book as well, right? So some of their background knowledge is not immediate firsthand lived experience. Some of it is also things that they've read, seen on in a movie, seen on television. And actually, that's something I should I want to pause right here and just flag something. There is something to be considered about where children's non-lived experience comes from. Okay. Because children know a whole lot, especially when you get into animals. Children know a whole lot about animals, or so they think, because of movies and programs, right? And some of that is accurate. Okay, they've seen a documentary, and some of that is what is done for advertising purposes. I once I once watched a teacher. They were talking about bears, and um, this was a little while ago. This ad campaign isn't around now, but one of the kids talked about how polar bears drink Coke. Okay, because might remember there was an ad campaign to that effect. So, so the teacher actually pulled up on the smartboard a picture of a polar bear and her cubs having dinner. Okay, they were eating a seal, and they had like literally had blood all over them from the seal. It was like, oh, I get, but you know, and I'm not sure. You have to think about what you're going to do. But what I want to highlight there is there's a whole lot of folks marketing a whole lot of stuff to kids that contains inaccurate information, and so that is something that we do need to hang on to. Connie, kids think they know all kinds of things about dinosaurs, don't they? Okay. Oh, and Karen's kids trees need sun and water. All right. And oh, and April, a child wanting a tree with a child. So children have had firsthand experience and they've had reading experience. My guess is that that child who says trees need sun and water, it could be because their family planted a tree and has been watering it. It's also possible that that's, something taken from a nature video or whatever that might be. What I want to highlight here is a couple things. One is every single child in our classroom has had experience with trees, right? That experience differs, right? Because some children have climbed trees. I've been in parks where children have been told to not lay down on the grass, okay, because that's not clean. So I have no doubt that there are children who would not be allowed to climb, perhaps not even touch a tree, right? So there are children who've had very different firsthand experiences with trees. Um, if you have the tire swing, then that's a firsthand experience. So a wide range of firsthand experiences with trees. The other thing I want to highlight is not all kids speak up and quickly reference their firsthand experience with trees. And so why is that? And I won't pretend to have a definitive answer, but there's at least a couple things that go on. Okay. One is one child, you know how this is in your classroom. You ask a question and there's somebody who's there with the answer right away. So other children don't have the opportunity to process and connect with their own memory. Instead, they're getting this other child's words. All right. And the other thing is, some children appear to simply have a harder time, or, harder time or slower. I don't know. Harder time, I'm thinking, accessing some of those memories. And so you may have to remind them, right? You may invite, them to pause and say, okay, think about what happened. When you look out your apartment window, what do you see? Oh, there's a tree, so you may need to do some questioning to help children access their 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 familiar may not be easily recalled. Okay. This happens again once you get older, all right? But for younger kids, it is actually sometimes challenging for them to pull up what they know. And so I want to give you a couple pieces to hold on through there. One is when we ask a question like, so tell me what you know about trees. If we're in a group, to to explicitly provide that think time. That's a really important piece of it so that everybody gets a chance to access their memories, okay, and their experiences, and not just the kids who do that quickly. And then listen for who has responses. And when there's that child there who's quiet, or especially the child that's always quiet, ask them some questions to evoke their experience. Okay. So that might be the child where you ask, so do you remember the tree that's in our playground? Or would you go look out the window and tell me if you see any trees? Or tell me about what you see out your apartment? What I want to suggest is that it's powerful for everybody to have that experience of accessing that background information. And some children are simply going to need think time for that, and other children are going to need explicit scaffolding to help them get there. All right. So, but we can do that. All right. So, just some thoughts on accessing. And what I call that is bridging the gap. They may not fluently apply what they know to new situations, so we help them access what they know. All right. So let's think a little bit about some big ideas around that. Those of you who are in Head Start or use the class tool, I just want to flag at this point that what we're talking about here is what the class would call concept development, which is their area for assessing adult support for higher level thinking. And a way we get at that is by helping children either access what happens in their everyday life or what's happening in our curriculum. So that's a couple connections there for those of you for whom that matters. For the rest of you, you don't need to have that background knowledge. So what I'm suggesting here is that when we're trying to support children in accessing their background knowledge, that we can that there are these we can be explicit about that, and there are at least a couple ways to do that. The one is that we can be very explicit about referencing that background knowledge. Okay, so we can be the one to say, we have trees on the playground, right? You used the big one to hide behind, and we raked the leaves last fall. So now the kids are going, oh, yeah, right? Okay. Or we can ask them questions, okay, and invite them to pull up those memories. So, do we have any trees outside? Where do you hide when you're playing the chase game, right? Those kinds of, oh, yeah. And remember when we were out with those rakes? What did we do with those rakes? But then, there are some more general questions over there on the right side that we can use around photos and things like that, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is simply this idea that we can be intentional about supporting children in accessing what they know to apply to new situations. Some kids won't need that much support. Other children will benefit from a lot, and we can do it either really through a tell or an ask. All right. So let me give you just an example here of a teacher doing that. And let me find the little notes on her doing that here. Okay. This is Ms. McCowan, and the child there with the very colorful bow in her hair was asking Miss McCowan, "Can you make a bridge for me?" And they'd been reading Three Billy Goats Gruff, and so Miss McCowan says, "Oh, you want to make a bridge for the billy goats?" And the kid says, "Uh-huh, yeah, but I don't know how to make one." And Miss McCowan says, "Well, I certainly could help. And you have lots of ideas about bridges. You and your mom, when you come to school, you go across the river, don't you?" "Oh, yeah, you do. Yeah. And do you remember when you're going across the river? Are you in the water? Are you on a boat?" "No, you're not." "Oh, you're on the road, aren't you? That road is a bridge." "Yeah, you drive on a bridge sometimes. Yeah. Every day when you come to school, you go on a bridge. Let's think about that bridge. Let's see. Do we know any other bridges?" I'm paraphrasing her right now, but the other bridge she went to describing was that there was an underpass near their school that they also went under, and over it was the train bridge. And so she referenced the train bridge. And so then they thought about, oh, so bridges can be flat on top, like for cars or billy goats to go on. And then you can kind of go under them too. So we'll need to make some kind of under. And all she did there was remind the child some about what they already knew that helped call up some memories that would help in the construction. Um, Here are some starter phrases, nothing magic there. I'm sure you can think of lots of others, but you know, inviting the child to reference some other experiences in their family or in the class. Yeah, I don't think we need to do those. And actually, we already talked about that. Here's an example. I thought this was a really interesting one. We happened to catch a series of photos around this too. So, these kids had read Three Little Pigs, and they had been doing a series of activities around Three Little Pigs. And the teacher came up. Can you see those really cool bricks there? I don't know where she got those. I kind of love them. And and she put those out on the art table along with some clay and some sticks and some. I think she had like that straw that you use in Easter baskets, right? And kids were doing construction, and she comes over and joins a child, and she's thinking, I wonder what he's thinking about, kind of joining him to be present piece. And then she's connecting by describing, "Oh, I see you pressing clay between the bricks." He'd been taking the clay and putting it in there, and Jason just says, "Uh-huh." So she's on with him now. And then she's thinking about, "Oh, I wonder how I can support his learning." And so she's watching and waiting. And then Jason says, "It keeps falling over." So I'm putting more in. So he'd been putting lots of clay in between the bricks and kept falling over. And so she's noticing that his strategy is to stack one brick on top of the next, 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 right? Which makes a little sense. But those of us who've gotten into first grade level construction know that there's not a lot of integrity in that kind of a wall, right? And it will fall over easily. And so she says, "You're stacking the bricks." And they'd had this really interesting, well, turned out to be really useful experience in the classroom just the other day, where they had gone over to the wall of their classroom, and their classroom was built out of cinder blocks, and they'd noticed each of the cinder blocks, and they'd seen the what do you call it, the grout in between the cinder blocks, whatever that grout is, whatever the cement that they put in between. And so they'd seen how there'd be a cinder block, and then there'd be a line, and then there'd be another cinder block. And she had introduced the vocabulary overlapping. Points for using overlapping, right? So she said, you're stacking the bricks. I remember yesterday we looked at the school bricks. Do you remember how the builders arranged them? So they go up, so he switches it up and they get into overlapping. And then he tries another strategy after that, where for some reason he decides he wants to put them end to end. So she describes that. But in any case, what I want to highlight there is that what she contributed to his play at that point was he'd had an experience in the classroom, actually, not at home. It happened to be in the classroom where he had background knowledge that was going to help him with the blocks. Now, he still wanted to do some other things. You don't get to control how children responded, but she did get to introduce knowledge that he then later used in his construction. Let me just pause here. Comments, questions. I've been talking a long time. Wow. Anything that anyone wants to add or ask? Give you time to access your background knowledge. I like those bricks too. I never asked her where she got them from, and I should have. If anybody knows what catalog those are from or whatever, please post it in the chat. Yeah. All right. So none of us has that background knowledge, apparently. All right. So what I want to do do with you from here is to look at three particular classroom opportunities for using what children know to step into something new, for using their prior experiences and prior knowledge to make sense of new situations. And one of them is going to be about what we do when we introduce new classroom materials. Okay, because we do that probably every week or so. You're bringing something new into the classroom, or every couple weeks, and we can help children make sense of those materials and use them well if we help them connect to some things they already know. A second opportunity is going to be in vocabulary. Children are always introducing new words, and one way we can do that is help children make sense from words and ideas they already have. And then the third is we're going to do some connecting, supporting read alouds by helping children use information they already have to make sense of read alouds in different settings or with different backgrounds. So, oh, Adriana, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly because you looks like you've rescued us. All right, so we've got a link in the chat. Everybody can be finished with the webinar now and go get the bricks. So, thank you. Nice one. Oh, and Tammy's comment is very expensive looking bricks. I hope not, right? Oh, you have looked them up before and they're not cheap. Oh dear. Oh well. Okay, well, when we win the lottery or and I don't know when we're going to get funding for anything. Anyway, we'll assume that at some point we will be showered with money and then we can buy those nice bricks. So in the meantime, let's think a little bit about background knowledge. When we sell our painting, then we can then we can buy those bricks, right? Bricks for everyone. Okay, so let's take a look at how we might use what children already know to help them use new materials well. And I want you to think, I'm guessing everybody has some kind of a sensory table, all right? And everybody puts different things in there depending on children's, sensitivities and cultures and so on. But let me just think with you a little bit about something that might look like, all right? So let's imagine that one of the things you've had in your sensory table was sand. Okay, so that's background knowledge for kids around sand, all right? And now you're taking the sand out and you're putting bird seed in, excuse me, bird food in. Okay, one of my colleagues says, never call it bird seed. It doesn't grow into birds. It's bird food. It's like, okay, great. So in any case, you're putting bird food in. And here's what the teacher did. And this is paraphrasing. I wasn't recording at the time, but This is the basic idea. Today we have a new material in the sensory table. It's bird seed. She called it bird seed. Food for birds. But we're not going to feed it to birds. We're going to play with it. Okay, so great so far, right? So now, anytime if you were putting bird food in the sensory table, think about what's going through your head right now. Bird food in the sensory table. All right. I don't want them putting it in their mouths. I want it like not spilled all over, not taken everywhere in the classroom. If they spill it, they can clean it up. Oh, also, I would like them to use it well, right? I don't want to just give them rules on it. I want them to use it with in some kind of playful way that allows them to explore and learn new ideas. So here's a couple ways that that might happen. Okay, a couple questions. All right. So here's, does this look like anything else we've had in the sensory table? Maybe a child would say sand, okay, in which case, oh, we can start making that connection. Or here's a more specific question. What else have we used in the sensory table? Oh, we had shaving cream, we had sand, or the kids could list some things. And then the teacher says, is the bird seed like any of those? Maybe she picks it up and, watches it go through her fingers. So anyway, at some point here, either by jogging a child's memory or by the teacher, if nobody goes there, the teacher can say directly, I think this looks a lot like sand. Remember how sand would crumble in our hands and it would flow and, so on and so forth. Okay, so we've made a connection to a prior experience, right? It's not sand, but it's kind of like sand, isn't it? Right? So if it's like sand, how do you think we can play with it? What were some of the things we did with sand? Oh, yeah, we had the dump trucks with the sand. Do you think the dump trucks would be good with the bird food? Oh, let's try the dump trucks. What else did we have with the sand? Oh, Elisa's remembering the funnels. We could try funnels with sand. So you see what's happening here is rather than the teacher saying, here we have bird food and here's how you play with it, she's saying, we did these other similar things. How did we play with that? And so helping children make that connection. And notice that two things are going on here. One is kids are getting smart about how to play with sand, right? Or how to play with bird food, right? Okay, that's first thing. That's the immediate thing. The second thing is children are practicing a thinking strategy. When I run into something new, I think about what's similar and I bring that knowledge forward. Okay, so simple. So now we've got kids going, oh, we can play with the dump trucks and we can use the funnels and the scoops and we can weigh it. And then, of course, the classroom management question. And what about how we take care of it? How did we take care of the sand? And some kid says, don't put it in your mouth. You think that'd be a good rule with the bird food too? Yeah, bird food is food for birds, not for people. Okay. What other rules did we have with the sand? And then you can talk about cleaning it up and whether you take it to the, into the kitchen area or whatever those things are. And what I want to highlight here is that you just completed a whole introduction to a new material in a way that will help the children use it well. And if this goes well, the kids just told everything that needed to be done, and they did it based on using their prior experiences. So I'd encourage you to just, think about when you've got new materials coming in. Whatever, like, I don't know if you're introducing anything new this week, you're introducing something next week, thinking about what you have coming in new into your classroom, and are there some connections that children can make to other materials used in the classroom or other places in their life? They can bring that forward and make sense of this new experience. So if you've got any ideas, jot some notes for yourself. I don't know if anyone's thinking of anything and wants to put it in the chat, but I would just give you that as a like when I always made it a practice when I put new things in the classroom that the material got introduced rather than children just whatever, right? And so if you do that kind of introduction, making those connections, we still want to keep it open-ended. It's still for them to explore, right? I'm not saying, you know, this is bird food and it has to be used in this way, but we're inviting them to use what they know to make sense of the new situation. Okay, so let's think of another sort of curriculum-based way to get into making connections between um, uh, um, um, familiar and less familiar kinds of experiences. And this time, what I'm going to do is I want to think with you some about words, okay? Because we're introducing new words all the time. And we actually had an earlier webinar where we talked about javelinas, so I thought I'd borrow them again. All right. So here is an example of a teacher making a very explicit link. So they're reading a book. Um, they were actually reading the book Three Little Javelinas, and she wanted to make some connections so that children would have some sense of what a javelina was. So she said, you know, these animals are called javelinas, and javelinas are a kind of pig. And then do you see how the javelina nose looks like a pig nose? So she's making this similarity there. We can see that pig nose. But javelinas have lots of hair. Yeah. And the pig we know about, we usually just get to see their pink skin. So these javelinas are hairy pigs. So she's defining this new creature, this new word in terms of something kids know something about. So let's see if we can do a little bit of that. And let's take the word bagel, which is, I don't know, do you folks have bagels for breakfast? Maybe if you've had bagels for breakfast, this is all familiar. But let's say you're reading, kids don't know about bagels, and you're reading a book. And in fact, the reason I chose this word was because I was in a classroom where they didn't have experience with bagels. And it was the book was about giving thanks. And they were giving thanks for all sorts. They're giving thanks for mom. They were, you know, whatnot, right? Their house. They were giving thanks for food, and the book had an illustration of a child eating a bagel. And the teacher said, "So, what's that child eating?" And the kids were all unanimous that the kid was eating a donut. Okay, which makes sense. So, how would you unpack that? What experiences might kids have? What might they know that would help them figure out that there's something different from a donut that is called a bagel? What might they know? Hmm. Does it have icing on it? Oh, so let's be clear. Why would the children call that a donut? Because it's round with a hole in the middle, right? And what I'm seeing Sandra do is trying, or Sandra, forgive me if I on your pronunciation. And then Christina's going looking at that top also. And so we want to talk about, oh, donuts are round and they have holes in them. Ah, donuts lots of times have icing, don't they? Yeah. So icing is like that frosting they put on, and it's really sweet, and it might be chocolate or it might be strawberry. Do you see any icing on there? No, I see little dots. That's something different. And then we can talk about the taste, can't we? Donuts taste sweet. This is a bagel, and bagels don't taste sweet. Bagels taste like, what do bagels taste like? What's the closest thing we could tell them bagels taste like? Sandra says bread. Would that be a reasonable? Now, those of you who are bagel aficionados, don't be offended, right? But is that a closer approximation than a donut? Yes, right? So bagels, they look a lot like donuts, but they don't have icing on them. Instead, they're little things called, well, they have different things on them. This one has sesame seeds. They're not sweet and they taste kind of like bread. We did pretty well. All right. Excavate. Let's try another word. What do kids know that'll help them make sense of excavate? We're reading a book about buildings and they're excavating. Hmm. What might we connect them with? Construction, digging. Oh, yeah. Construction machines, removing and lift. So we're going to want to use the word dig. And we may talk, and like excavate is a word that gets used with machines, right? If I go in my backyard and I dig a little hole to for a fence post, I'm not excavating, right? Actually, that's an interesting distinction, right? So we might, Andrew, you're going to make a connection with that set. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Okay, so excavating is about digging. And so we've seen people dig with shovels, we've seen people dig with big machines, construction machines. All right, so we can make those connections. How about hurricane? Those of you in Florida, you've lived through this, but those of you in Illinois, your kids have never been in a hurricane. Oh, Kyla's got a book song for us. Great. Okay, so the first place to go with hurricane is it's a storm. Okay, and what kinds of things are in that storm? Rain, wind, thunder, and lightning. But could we say it's very windy. Yeah. It might be so windy it would knock me down. Okay. So we're taking experiences they've had. They've had experience with wind, thunder and lightning, rain, storms, and we're making connections. Right. And that's pretty straightforward. But when we think about supporting children with vocabulary, that's what we're doing, right? Is taking the word and thinking about what experiences and concepts do they have that they can reference. I'm kind of loving the excavating in the sand. All right. So let's take one other place to make a connection. And that is around for read alouds. All right. And we've got three little javelinas here. There's the book, right? And the obvious connection here, I mean, this book is clearly what would you call that? When a book repeats the pattern of another book. Is there a word for that? A knockoff. It's not a sequel. I don't know, but those of you who know this book, Three Little Javelinas, it is the story of the three little pigs, but it's set in the desert Southwest with javelinas and so on instead, right? So what you a retelling? Oh, yeah, there we go, right? It's a retelling. That fits for me. Help me out with that vocabulary. So when we're introducing that book, something we might do is say, remember, we did read a book called The Three Little Pigs. Do you remember that book, The Three Little Pigs? What happened in that book? And then the kids can retell, oh yeah, there was a wolf. And what did the uh, Three Little Pigs do with the wolf? Oh yeah, there was one who built a house and then it got blown over, and then there was another one who built a house and it got blown over, and then there was one who built a really strong house and it didn't get blown over. Okay, let's see if that what these javelinas do. So by referencing that, let me check. I'm guessing a number of you do author studies. And I'm wondering if in author studies you do anything to make connections between books. And if anyone has anything they'd want to comment on, either in the chat or coming or even out loud if you want, because that seems to me a really like just a place that kind of connection to prior experiences is just sitting there waiting to be made. Okay. So let me give folks a moment to comment on author studies. And sometimes the kids make the connections. Absolutely. Yeah. If we don't, then they do. And then you actually have an interesting decision to make when you're reading that, like you get to that third or fourth book in the author's story. Do you make the connection beforehand so that the children use that background knowledge in understanding this new book? Or do you let it sit there and emerge over the course of the story? Right. And it might depend on how tough the comprehension was, but for sure, I mean, if you're doing The one that I saw was, I don't remember what the sequence of the stories was, but someone was doing an author study of that old children's book author, Ezra Jack Keats. And if you know um, those books, the character Peter recurs in several of those stories. And so when you know something about Peter, then you can use that information in subsequent stories to make sense of those stories as well. So I do want to suggest, though, that like you do have this question that you're holding on to. Do I inform children of that so that they use that in the comprehension? Or is that something we discover during the story? Or is that something we think about afterwards? Okay. But for sure, at some point, you want to make those connections. Anything else anyone wants to say um, about the sort of author studies look like? Okay. Um, so here was one that I watched a teacher do. This is, I don't know if anybody reads this book still, but I kind of love this book still. It's an old, kind of, I look at it as a classic. And for those of you who don't know this story, it's called Unga Bunga. And in the story, there's a baby who is crying. Everybody tries to soothe the baby. And like dad can't do it, mom can't do it, the grandparents can't do it. Everybody's trying to, they do different things, rocking or singing or making faces or whatnot, and nobody can soothe the baby till finally the baby's favorite person, her brother, comes over, and then baby Louise is happy. But the background knowledge piece here is, here's how the teacher entered this was in our book today, when baby Louise is crying, lots of people try to help her stop crying. Some of you have babies at your house. What do people do when your baby is crying? Okay. So, um, there will be children with younger siblings, right? And so we can surface that information. And for those children, then that background information is right there. And they can use that in that story. And for the children who don't have siblings at home, they now have some information to use going into this story. All right. Um, this is one of those where interesting things can show up when you ask that question because people do things differently. All right. Oh, all right. So what I wanted to offer here, what this slide is about, is that like back here, this educator was explicitly giving the children information that would help them make that connection. You always, there's always a choice between a tell and an ask. And you could do that as an ask instead, right? This book title is Three Little Javelinas. These animals are javelinas. Do they remind you of any other animal? Okay. Or The Three Little Javelinas. Does that remind you of another book? Did we read the Three Little Anything Elses? Right. So you can invite rather than tell. That's always a choice. All right. So let me just pause and give you a moment to think about books that you may be reading currently or soon, and think about if there's um, background knowledge that children may be carrying into those books that you might want to explicitly help make visible for them and for everyone else. Mm. A minute for you on that. Right, let's take our last little while and just do a little bit of thinking about some of the differences in background knowledge. Um, oh, thank you for that, Shannon. Yeah. Have you ever tried something you thought you didn't like, but ended up liking once you're reading Green Eggs and Ham, aren't you? Yeah. Absolutely. That's a life lesson right there. Yes. All right. Thanks. Great. Yeah. And I would just invite you to, oh, it's Dr. Seuss week. Oh, yeah. All right. See, I'm not in a classroom right now. Sad. Um, but I would just invite you as you think about how you plan your storybook reads to be thinking about, are there places where children can be making connections and what might those connections be? And that, of course, brings us to thinking about how different children's background knowledge is, right? And so, when you think about the children that you work with and what they come to school with, and I do want to be intentional about framing this, okay? And I want to borrow this phrase that I haven't heard it as much lately, but used to be used as a good descriptor, and I think it still fits. And that's the idea of children or people in general having funds of knowledge, and that whoever the person is, whoever the child is, they do know a whole lot about whatever it is that is needed to function in their family, in their community, in their culture, in whatever their experiences are. Okay. And everybody has life experiences that they're making sense of, and we can connect them. We can make connections. We can we can learn about their backgrounds and assist in making those connections. And I want to be intentional about thinking about learning about children. And we do those questionnaires at the beginning of the year, and then we continue to learn about children throughout the year. And that we're intentional then about not just filing that away, but thinking about, oh, if this family has had these experiences, then what might this child be walking in the door with that I can help make meaningful for them? Something I especially want to attend to is this notion. I did a lot of early literacy work in the early 2000s, and there was this huge concern about what was referred to as the knowledge gap. And I don't want to pretend that it's not about anything at all, but I do want to highlight something here. The idea was, and this, is still a point of discussion, is that children from some backgrounds, typically those associated with lower socioeconomic status, less money, are less likely to have access to the materials and life experiences that build knowledge that's privileged in school. Okay. I do want to be clear that doesn't mean they don't have knowledge. It means that what we talk about in school may not be what gets referenced as consistently in some of their life experiences. All right. And so I would just invite us to think about what cultures are privileged in school discourse. Okay. The family, my son and daughter are making sure get to school every day now because things are crazy in Minnesota right now. Um, I can't imagine walking from Ecuador. Okay. What that life experience is, what the wisdom and knowledge was that was picked up along the way, I can't begin to imagine. I would say, though, that it probably is different from the knowledge that gets privileged when I'm reading Make Way for Ducklings. Okay. And so recognizing the differences in those life experiences and finding ways to connect with all of those is valuable. And then recognizing as well that there is a body of knowledge that is power in our society and helping children get connected to whatever that is. So when we are building background knowledge about trees, children who don't, let me just make the comparison here. My kids, my mother-in-law lived on 15 acres at the edge of town. My children were feral, all right, and they by the time they were 6 or 7, they could distinguish between an oak and an ash and a poplar and a willow, and they because they'd climbed them and built with them and all the rest of that. Okay, so they had all kinds of experiences, but we can provide those experiences for everybody, right? We can do things to build background knowledge. And so, one sort of typology for that is introducing some book learning, introducing some hands-on learning, going out into the field with children, whatever that might be, and trying to give children opportunities so that all children have that opportunity to build the background knowledge that helps people function in this American society. Um, at the same time, we know that children need to see themselves in whatever is happening so that they not only can connect with that background knowledge, but so that they can see themselves as being valued and important. And so a place to do that is in our classroom conversations and certainly in our books. Let's see. I guess it's time to put this all together. So that's an awful lot of, that's too many ideas for them all to be key ideas, isn't it? But here's basically where we've been today. Children make sense of their worlds through their prior experiences, right? They bring those forward. The tote bag is a sort of metaphor for that. We can make visible what children know, and the KWL chart is a vehicle for doing that, but it's only one. The idea here is that if we make visible what they know, then they're more likely to use it because they don't always access that themselves. So we can help support them in accessing their background knowledge, and we can make that visible. And then we can be explicit about making those links either by tells or by asks. There are places in our curriculum where we can make that happen. Centers are a place. Words and books are a place. And then just remembering that, while all background, children come in with varied background knowledge, all children are competent in what they know, and we can support all children in developing the background knowledge that enables them to be successful. Let's see. I think, yeah. How's this connect with your background knowledge? And what do you want to do to maybe a practice that would strengthen your support for children's accessing of theirs? And I think that's what we've got for today. Oh, if you were wondering about the oil tanker, $9.2 million. You have to take possession in the Western Mediterranean. They're not sailing it to you. All right. So please be in touch if that's helpful. And thanks for your work with children.